reduction, malnutrition in cancer, how do we screen, how do we support, and lifestyle related cancers and myths and facts. So, cancer. So, this scares the hell out of everybody. I know it does for me also. So, cancer is uncontrolled growth of cells and spread into surrounding tissues. So just growth is not enough. जब वो आसपास के tissues में जाना चालू कर देते हैं, तो that is what we call cancer. And as we know, why we are here, because cancer is rising. Believe it or not, this is something kind of a pandemic which is going to come. Only two things are rising and are cause of cancer death in people. One is heart diseases or any non-communicable disease, diabetes, hypertension, heart diseases, and second is cancer, and this is going to rise every day. We will be focusing on why this is rising and what we can do about it. But everybody should know about cancer, its symptoms, and how to diagnose it, how do we deal with it. So this is need of the hour. And the reason being that there are a lot of modifiable factors which are responsible for cancer. The important ones being obesity, physical activity, diet, very important, something for which we have gathered here. Tobacco and alcohol have been there since very long, but the uses of that same thing is increasing. That's why the cancers are on a rise. So cancer and malnutrition. So the first thing is all patients with cancer are at nutritional risk, but not all patients become malnourished. There are a lot of patients who are not malnourished. It depends on cancer, the type of cancer they are suffering from, and this stage at which they are in. And different stages of cancer have different needs for patients as well as caregivers. So we cannot treat everybody in a similar way. They are all different. When we see in OPD, at least 25 to 50% of our patients are nutritionally compromised when they visit our OPD. And by the time they finish our treatment, at least 60 to 80% patients develop malnutrition, and in roughly 50% over a period of their cancer journey they develop cachexia, and 10 to 20% are going to die of just malnutrition. So your role is very important in for any cancer patient. Thanks. So malnutrition, it affects the patient in variety of ways. It causes weight loss, it causes poor wound healing. As a surgeon, we have to face a lot of problem because of malnourishment. The tissues don't heal well. The patients need support in the form of electrolyte and fluid balance. They have depressed immune function, which make them more prone to infections, and all this is cause of increased morbidity and mortality in cancer patients. The malnutrition is not just because of the disease, it is also because of the therapy that we give. Surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, all of them are responsible for malnutrition in the patient. And every patient should get the nutrition assessed, and it is not just a one-step process. It's not just one time you have to see the patient. You have to see them throughout their treatment course and assess them even after their treatment is completed, because a lot of them have long-term side effects which also affects their nutrition. So even after completion of their treatment, you have to see them. The optimal calorie which we target is 25 to 35 kilocalorie per kg per day, and similarly protein requirements of 1 to 1.5 gram per kg per day, which is higher than a normal individual. So causes of unintentional weight loss. So whenever the patient presents to us, they have weight loss which is unintentional. They have not done anything to lose the weight, but there are various reasons. So malignancy itself is one of the cause, and in ways like it causes obstruction, it can cause malabsorption. A lot of patients have altered taste, they have anorexia as a symptom, and because of the diagnosis of cancer, they may be depressed, and that's why they've stopped eating properly. treatment itself in the form of chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery causes weight loss, and at times it may be drug induced or it may be infection induced. All these are part of cancer patients, are present in cancer patients. At times, without all these also, they have altered metabolism, altered fat metabolism, and there are certain factors which are increased in patients with cancer, like tumor necrosis factor, IL-1, IL-6. These play important role in metabolism of carbohydrate, lipids, as well as proteins. So that's why all these factors also have some role in causing weight loss. So there are certain malignancies which are at higher risk. So not all patients suffer from, cancer patients suffer from malnutrition. These are high-risk malignancies, and there have been various studies which show that these are the cancers where there is much higher rate of malnutrition. These malignancies are mainly in the GI tract, esophagus, stomach, where the patient has dysphagia or vomiting because of the obstruction, pancreas again causing similar anorexia, head and neck cancer patients because they are not able to swallow properly, and at times colorectal cancers because of their diarrhea or altered bowel habits. These patients are at higher risk of developing malnutrition. So whenever a patient comes, the first step of improving nutrition is first to assess the patient. So there are two terminologies. One is nutritional assessment, the other is nutritional screening. So whenever a patient comes to us, we first identify the patients who are at higher risk for malnutrition in the form of their symptoms, and I'll tell you the tools which we use, and then we send it to you for nutritional assessment, where you collect and analyze data and then see how much we can help them. There are various tools and there are various tests. So now a very common test that we use is albumin or pre-albumin. So a word of caution here, these are not very reliable because these are acute phase reactants and they may be altered because of the inflammatory process that is ongoing in any cancer patient. So you cannot always rely on albumin. If the patient's albumin is normal, that doesn't mean that the patient cannot be malnourished, because they are altered because of the inflammatory process. So generally for any cancer patients, these are the nutritional requirement. For a normal metabolic patient, 25 to 30 kilocalories. In a higher metabolic, hypermetabolic, or the patient in which we want weight gain to be there, so higher, we have to go up to 30 to 35. And in obese patients, the requirement may be on a lower side. Similarly, the protein requirement increases in patients who have protein enteropathy conditions or with hypermetabolism. Now the third point is very, very important, and which is missed most of the times, is your fluid requirement. I have seen very often that we focus on the energy, we focus on the protein, but we forget about fluid. This is something which should never be forgotten, and make sure from tomorrow onwards, if you see any patient in OPD, IPD, you make sure that the patient is able to complete his fluid requirement. In general, if the patient doesn't have any contraindication, is generally 30 to 35 ml per kg per day is what we target. So there are certain nutritional screening tool, and in that the first tool, the malnutrition screening tool, is validated in oncology patient. This is something which we generally use. We see for the weight, the percentage weight loss, and the appetite. There are various other tools including mini nutritional assessment, which is validated in elderly population. So in Tata Memorial Hospital, there is a separate study going on for geriatric population. They have a group of medical oncologists, surgical oncologists, radiation oncologists, and dietitians who see these geriatric patients. They assess their nutritional status, and then based on that they give recommendation on what is to be done to improve their nutrition. So that is something which is done separately, and when I was there, we were working on this geriatric oncology patients. So to collect nutrition data, data, we go by nutrition history, and in that history you can use a food diary for the patient. You can ask the patient to recall whatever they have eaten in last 24 hours, or you can use a calorie count, which is not very reliable. The tests, as I showed, albumin, pre-albumin and serum transferrin, please be cautious that these may be affected by the ongoing inflammatory process in any cancer patients. There are various tests in the anthropometry, but they are quite expensive, like DEXA scan, and not very easily available in majority of the centers. So we can use skin fold measurement or mid-arm circumference and to see for weight loss in the patients. So there is nutritional assessment tools. I hope all of you must be using one of these. And there is subjective global assessment or the patient generated subjective global assessment. There are various nutritional risk index and there are other scores. The last score I want everybody of you to know about this is Karnofsky score. It is a functional score. So whenever you see a patient, the moment patient walks into your OPD or you are seeing a patient in the IPD or in the ICU, make sure that you assess his or her Karnofsky score. It is something which the patient, you see the patient, how much he is affected by the disease, how much time he is out of the bed and how much time he is spending in the bed. Based on that, we can, from 100 to 0, there are various categories, and in majority of our decision making in cancer treatment, we use this score to see whether this treatment, so a patient who is a performance status of 3 or 4 is not an ideal candidate for majority of the cancer treatment, while the patient who has a performance status of 0, 1 or 2, so 0 is not affected at all, 1 is mild symptoms which is not really affecting his daily activities, 2 is more or less up and about most of the day, but he is affected by the cancer disease process. 3 is majority of the time he is spending most of the time in the bed. 4 is almost a moribund patient, and the 5 is dead patient. So this score is generally, so whenever you see our notes, you'll always find general condition, GC fair or PS 0, 1, 2. Some people use this Karnofsky score between 0 to 100. So that is something which is very important and has been used worldwide to see whether the patient, whatever treatment we are advising the patient is actually going to work or not, or the patient is not going to tolerate that treatment. So these are the treatment, so subjective global assessment. This is filled by you or me, the treatment provider, cancer treatment provider, the dietitians or the, so the other two is patient generated subjective global assessment, where patient also fills a part of it. Part A is filled by the patient, part B is filled by the physician or the treating doctor, and based on this we calculate a score and then decide whether our patient needs any nutritional support or he or she is able to take the nutrition properly. Next. So the pros and cons, the advantage is because the patient also participate in nutritional assessment, so it is much better, and this has been widely validated in most of the oncology patients. This was even used in Tata also. So this is something which is quite easy, but it has some problem because the patient also has to fill up. So at times the patient, if not well educated, he may not be able to give reliable information, and it takes time to fill these proformas, and for every patient to do it, it becomes cumbersome. But otherwise, this is one of the best scale to get to assess the nutritional score of the patient. So once you have assessed the patient, there will be patients who would need nutritional support. So first word of caution is, any nutritional support is just an adjunctive therapy and not a curative therapy. So in modern era, you will find a lot of patients coming to you with different questions. I'll be coming to myths of these diet patterns. So none of the diet pattern has been found to cure any cancer. So please tell patients and counsel your patients that whatever you are doing is just a adjunctive therapy and not a curative therapy. They should not just rely on dietary changes for their cancer cure. Second is that all of the patients, you need to assess them. So it's always an individualized assessment. It's not a one size fits all. So you have to assess your patient. Every patient has different cancer, different stage of the cancer and nutritional status. So this is always individualized. So generally for patients who have less than 50%, who are not able to meet their requirement less than 50% for more than 1 week, or 50 to 75% more than 2 weeks, are the candidates who need nutrition support. Sometimes you might be asked to provide home nutrition therapy for terminally ill patients. This is very, very common that patients, they call me, sir, patient, we have not treated the patient was taking some alternative treatment and now he is bedridden, and can we put rice tube, can we give this, can we give that saline and all that, for just for their own sake. So whenever you are advising home nutrition therapy, make sure that the patient has life expectancy of more than 40 days and the patient has good functional status. Again, the same thing on Karnofsky score or whatever performance status that you are using, and the caregiver should be supportive. Only then you advise home nutrition therapy, otherwise do not advise home nutrition therapy for terminally ill patients. So there may be two sources of nutrition support. We can use the enteral nutrition or the parenteral nutrition. So we all know that the enteral nutrition is better. It is used when the GI tract is functional. It is less invasive, it is less, the complication rates are much lesser, and it is less costly. The burden is, the first is excess of that enteral nutrition, which will come in shortly, diarrhea, reflux and vomiting. The contraindication for any enteral nutrition would be whenever your GI tract is not working. So it is obstructed, there is a fistula through which whatever you will give through your enteral route will come out. The patient has severe mucositis, so nothing is going to get absorbed. Hemodynamically unstable patients who are on large noradrenaline or all those supports, and thrombocytopenia, because always there is a risk that your catheters or whatever you are putting can cause bleeding. So parenteral, in all these cases, we use parenteral nutrition whenever the GI tract is dysfunctional, and it is only source of patients who cannot feed enterally, and the burden is always cost and infections. Contraindication would be whenever you are not getting any IV access or the caregivers are not supportive. Next. So enteral, normally we use a nasoenteric or rice tube in common language whenever the feeds are required for less than 4 weeks, or nasojejunal tube, which we use normally whenever we operate a esophagus or a stomach malignancy. Whenever you need nutrition for longer duration, that is for more than 4 weeks, we advise getting either a percutaneous gastrostomy or a open or a laparoscopic gastrostomy or jejunostomy, and at times we can do a gastrojejunectomy for the patients who are obstructed, like for patients with carcinoma head of pancreas or carcinoma of the duodenum, where you can bypass this by doing a gastrojejunectomy. And a lot depends on the site of the tumor. Like for head and neck cancer patients, like for patients who have tongue cancer, larynx cancer, we prefer putting a PEG. For patients who have esophagus malignancies, you can put a PEG if it is higher up in the esophagus, or you prefer a jejunostomy when it is lower down. For a stomach or pancreas, you prefer something lower down, like in the jejunum. So enteral feeding formula, so the concentration what? So there is no universal guideline which formula to be used. It all depends on your individualized assessment of the fluid status and how much volume can the patient tolerate. A lot will also depend on the comorbidities of the patient like CCF, renal problems, other issues. How good is the organ function, how good he is able to tolerate fluids as well as the GI function, and for how long does the patient need this enteral feeding support. There are various things which have been in the market, and you will often come across people coming from these companies to include these things like arginine, vitamin E and antioxidant, something which is widely there in the market. You eat antioxidant, give antioxidants to your patients. So at present there is no study to support that you should routinely add antioxidants for your patients. There is no role for asking the patient to spend that much money on these things. And similarly, if the patient is able to tolerate enteral feeding formula, then these at present these are not recommended. Next. So the complications generally that we see is for GI complications, and the most common GI complication that we see is diarrhea. So in diarrhea, whenever you see a patient where you have started enteral feeding, always look for the antibiotics. Most of the ICU patients are on a higher antibiotics and they have very high risk of developing this Clostridium difficile associated diarrhea. So your diet may not be responsible. It is the antibiotics who are causing this, and we have to either stop those antibiotics or give antibiotics which can prevent infection of Clostridium difficile. At times, the patients are on chemo drugs which cause diarrhea, like 5-fluorouracil, irinotecan. They are drugs which cause diarrhea. So your diet is not responsible. It is the drug that is causing. And always fiber-containing formula helps in your controlling diarrhea. Another word of caution is metabolic complications, and our patients are the ones who are at higher risk because they have not eaten for very long. They have undergone surgery. Before surgery, they were not eating, and you start your diet immediately from full force, they are going to develop refeeding syndrome. So the patients who are at higher risk are those who have not had adequate intake for more than 7 to 10 days, and it is always advisable that you start with a lower dose of around 30 ml per hour. See the patient's tolerance and then gradually increase. Always include vitamin B1 for patients who are malnourished for a longer time. The third problem that we see is regurgitation and aspiration, and always we blame that the quantity is higher. But in general, there are only two things. If you see that the return or the residue is more than 250 ml, you have to see that the functionality of the GI tract decrease the quantity, and always ask the patient that whenever they are the nurses, that whenever they are giving the feed, please elevate the head end to 30 to 45 degree, and this is the only thing that has been proven to help in regurgitation or aspiration. Another word of caution, as I was telling you, that from tomorrow onwards, for all patients, please make sure that you are seeing the fluid status of the patient, especially if the patients are elderly, or if they have some cardiac comorbidities, or they are renal patients. Always avoid overhydration. In other ways also, second thing that you have to remember is that whenever you are calculating fluid loss, always see if they are having any ileostomies or any stomas. Stomas lose a lot of fluids, so always you have to add more fluids for these patients. So it is not just overhydration that you have to look for, it is also underhydration, that these patients need more fluids. So whenever I do a ileostomy for the patient, I ask the nurse that you have to give more fluids, you have to make sure that the patient is drinking more water, and especially sodium rich water, because these patients are at risk of developing hyponatremia. Another thing that you are not responsible but can put you in a lot of trouble is mechanical complications. Especially whenever we put PEG tubes or something, there is always inflammation. If you're putting a RICE tube, the patient will have inflammation around the nostrils. If a PEG tube is placed, there will be excoriations. And whenever you are going to see a patient, make sure that these sites around which the tubes are being put are well taken care of. And the last and most important thing, please tell nurses to flush regularly with at least 20 ml or whatever at the end of the feed. They forget and this causes blockage of the RICE tube or whatever feeding tube we are putting, and then again we have to put in new tubes, and this becomes a big challenge, especially if they are PEG tubes which have been inserted endoscopically, and they cause a lot of financial as well as mental issues with the patients. So coming to parenteral nutrition, so whenever we have to give temporary parenteral nutrition, we rely on central lines. Most of your patients would be getting parenteral feeds through IJV or subclavian, and rarely we use a femoral line. For permanent catheters, we use a PICC line, PICC peripherally inserted central catheters, or indwelling port for a long-term parenteral nutrition whenever the patient needs. So this you are all already aware of these. So whenever we calculate the patient's demand of calculating the calorie need, so we divided it into amino acids, dextrose, and lipids. So these three: carbohydrate, protein, and lipids. So amino acids should be at least 10 to 20% of the total energy needs. Whenever you are giving dextrose, always consider the IV fluids in DNS or dextrose that is going for the patient. So you have to include that also in the calculation. Start with a smaller dose. It is very important because some of the patients may develop hyperglycemia, as well as be cautious when you are putting insulin or advising insulin that the patient do not develop hypoglycemia. Another word of caution: whenever you are withdrawing parenteral nutrition for any patient, please make sure that it is a tapering doses. You cannot abruptly stop parenteral nutrition for the patient because they may get rebound hypoglycemia. So these two things which we have to see. Lipids are always a trouble because they are more dense to give. So we generally prefer 1 gram per kg or 20 to 30% of the energy need, and the rate should be slower. So generally we have IV nutrition bags which come with combination of all three, or at times lipid is given separately. You might be knowing Cabiven and Aminoven and all those products which are you routinely use in our ICU setups. So always fluid requirement according to patient's tolerance. Make sure that the patient are getting enough electrolytes in the form of sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium in ICU setups, and multiple vitamins in A, D, K, and vitamin B, folate, zinc, and vitamin C. Next. So complications, always parenteral nutrition is associated with lot of complication. Whenever possible, please advise, please choose enteral nutrition. That is always better. Metabolic complication, as I had already told, hypoglycemia. And again, the patients who have not been fed can develop refeeding syndrome. Infections, because it's a central line, so the patient may develop sepsis. And whenever you are not using your GI tract, it is quite common to have atrophy or bacterial overgrowth or bacterial translocation in these patients. So this is all about nutritional support. Just a small talk about lifestyle related cancers. As I told, cancer is on a rise, and the one factor that is responsible for it is our lifestyle changes that have happened in last 50 to 100 years. So the quality of food has changed significantly. So we know that body weight, diet, and physical activity, these three are very, very important, and they help in prevention of breast, colorectal, ovarian, endometrial, and prostate. So these are lifestyle related cancers and these are preventable cancers. And we know that if the person does increased physical activity, the chances of colorectal and breast cancers are much lesser in patients who are physically fit. Again, the patients who are obese with a higher BMI in males, rectal cancer and melanomas are higher. In female, breast and endometrial cancers are on a higher side. And obesity in these cancers have a poorer prognosis. So if you see a patient who's obese, especially in breast who are post-menopausal, the prognosis is poorer because of increased conversion in peripheral fat, colon, prostate, endometrial, and again ovarian cancers. So coming quickly to the myths related to diet and cancer, a lot of these I was not also aware. When I prepared the presentation for this talk, I came to know that these are something which people are using. So first of all, there is no anti-cancer diet. There is nothing that cures cancers. Okay, and most of the diets that are there in the market, they lack scientific evidence. A lot of people come to me and ask me, especially my relatives, we have started drinking alkaline water. So will it prevent cancer? We have heard that our cancer is acidic. We add alkaline water and everything. We have heard of Kangen water. Somebody came to me and said that, okay, it's there in Tata. Please start in Ramakrishna also. I said, no, please provide evidence. And he never came back. So this is something which has no proof. So I'll tell you the reason behind it. So all this is not at all scientific because your pH is regulated by kidney. So no matter how much acidic or how much basic alkaline fluid or whatever you take, if your kidneys are impaired, nothing is going to help. Or if your kidneys are normal, these are not going to help. So your cancer is, the cancer cells are around your tissues. And in tissues, whatever you drink is not, so suppose you drink a water with a pH of 8, 9 or 10, it is not going to reach your cells. It will be filtered by the kidney. So please understand this scientific basis and how bullshit is whatever these people are saying about alkaline this thing. If you start drinking alkaline water, can it change the pH around cells in your body? No, it cannot. It is highly regulated by kidneys, by the pH in the blood and everything. So this is not going to help you. There is still insufficient evidence on role of low carb diet. Whenever patients develop cancer, they will ask, we'll stop eating all the sugars. Sugar causes cancer. All this is not evidence based. Yes, your sugars are harmful because they cause a lot of inflammation. But it's not like you have to stop eating sugar from tomorrow. Keto diet may be beneficial in certain cancers including glioblastoma and neuroblastoma, but we still need a lot of randomized evidence. Whatever we see is just by experience, and by experience you can always misjudge. It may be effect of other things which we don't know right now. Next. Again, Mediterranean food, it has low glycemic index, so it is always better. Now there is a lot of talk that vegan diet is protective. I do agree with this because especially patients who are consuming red meat, it has a lot of compounds which are harmful and may cause cancer, but this never come in the market. But in West, they have accepted that a lot of studies have been done and which say that yes, red meat which is cooked is harmful. Again, intermittent fasting may be beneficial for some chemotherapy outcomes. Always include a lot of fiber in diet, especially for Indians. And there is some evidence that maybe for upper GI cancer patients and their surgeries, these arginine and fatty acids and nucleotides may be helpful. Next. So coming to proteins and fats, again something which you might also be getting a lot of, sir, दूध पीना बंद कर देते हैं, कल से कैंसर होना बंद हो जाएगा, और for wound healing milk is bad, we don't recommend. So all these things are not at all scientific. Milk and dairy products, in fact, are even recommended during radiation. And if you see a vegetarian patient, where will he get proteins from? So always tell them these are not at all scientific, and patients should have milk and dairy products. Again, another thing which is there commonly for breast cancer patients, so soy protein, the moment they are diagnosed, they say that okay, you cannot take estrogens, or soy protein contains estrogen. But again, these are good source of vegetarian protein, and they should not be discarded, and there is no evidence at present that these are harmful. Then again, a lot of people say that okay, I take like after workout or in the morning I take a lot of protein and then that is enough. No, the protein has to be spread throughout the day, and we generally recommend that with lunch or dinner you add 20 to 30 gram, and with each snack like breakfast and evening you add 10 to 20 grams. So it should be spread over throughout the day. Again, omega-3 fatty acids are recommended for malnourished patient, not a patient who is normal. Okay, and MCTs are recommended for patients with malabsorptive disorder. This is something which we also use when we have chyle leaks. So whenever we injure, so there are certain surgeries like in neck dissection, we injure chyle duct. Chyle duct carries your all the absorbed lipids and puts it into the systemic circulation. Whenever we injure chyle duct and there is a lot of leakage, then we prefer middle MCTs which are directly absorbed and they are not into the lymphatic circulation. So this is something like in chylothorax or chyloperitoneum, or in neck drains, whenever the chyle leak is there, we prefer MCTs. Again, antioxidants. So a lot of people from various pharmaceutical companies come to me and ask, sir, please start giving coenzyme Q10 with so much, they are so costly, but we have no data that they are at all helpful. Again, in the West, they use lot of multivitamin supplements like vitamin D, C, and they are not have really scientific that they actually prevent any cancer. And again, curcumin, they say that routinely you use it, but it's not at all helpful. A lot of patients ask me, sir, can we take these herbal supplements or alternative therapy while the cancer treatment is going on? If they ask you the same question, please tell them no, you should not take. They interfere with cancer treatment. I don't know whether they are helpful or not, but they really do interfere with chemotherapy drugs. Their efficacy, they may cause overload of those chemotherapy drugs. So when they have stopped all the treatment, please tell them to take at their own risk. But while the cancer treatment is going on, no herbal supplements at all. There is a lot of role coming for cannabinoids, including dronabinol for cancer cachexia. That may be a wonder drug that may come in the future. Yes. Okay, and again, all these things, sugar causes cancer, no artificial sweeteners, no microwave cooking, again, Teflon utensils or genetically modified food, which we commonly see. All these are not dangerous. What can be dangerous is artificial food colors, which are there in lot of foods now. Again, food stored in plastics, we have seen that now a lot of research is going on, and we say that in our even circulation, lot of plastics are there, microplastics are there. There is a compound called dioxin which is released from these plastic bags, and whenever possible, please avoid storing food in plastics. Again, vegetables grown with pesticides. Yes, pesticides are harmful, especially for patients who are neutropenic or undergoing chemotherapy. And in cancer cachexia, a lot of people advise progestins and steroids, but for long-term duration, they are not at all helpful. So these are common myths related to cancer. That's all. So to end my talk, nutrition plays an important role in patients undergoing cancer treatment. The first step is to screen the patient and assess the patient for malnutrition and nutritional deficiencies. do not stop nutritional support until for a long term time, because the patients may have side effect for a longer period of time. No diet is proven to be effective in curing cancer. They are just adjunctive, and lifestyle modifications can be really helpful, especially physical activity and preventing obesity. They are the things that we can do to prevent cancer. That is all we can do as of now. There is still a lot to be done in cancer field. We still don't know reasons for a lot of cancers, why that patient developed cancer and why not this. Okay, so but these are something which we can do and incorporate in our day-to-day active routine, and that can help us prevent some of the cancers. And thank you for your patient listening. Thanks a lot, and I'll take the questions at the end if you have any.